Welcome to Your Tech Makeover, the podcast that gives you tips and tricks to help you simplify and get more out of the technology in your life. I'm your host, Frank Bravo. Today's topic is making the most of your phone camera. You know, this is just in time for the holiday season when we're all pulling out our phones to capture family moments, meals, decor, and more. Smartphones have become a studio in your pocket, but most of us have only scratched the surface of what they can do. I know that I struggle a lot of times taking really good photos. I'm thrilled today to have with me my good friend and longtime collaborator, Don Feria. I first met Don back when we were working at the Palo Alto Weekly, where he was a photographer. And over the years, I've watched him go from an award winning photojournalist and Major League Baseball shooter to an instructor at Stanford's University's continuing studies, where he teaches classes and has taught on cell photography. His work spans big league assignments and everyday storytelling. And now he's helping all of us take better pictures with our cameras that we carry already. In this episode, Don and I will dive into the practical and easy apply techniques of composing tips, some lighting tricks, and some real world holiday photography advice for food, group photos, and capturing kids and pets. If you've ever wanted to take better photos with your smartphone this season, or just in general, you're in the right place. So, Don, hey, thanks for joining. I really appreciate you being here today.
Frank, such a fun time to be with you, and for the relationship that we've had for so long. It's really an honor to be on all your projects, and this is going to be fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So, you know, you've worked with some amazing gear as a pro photographer, but why do you think that mobile photography has become such a big deal for everybody?
You know, Frank, this is a question that I've been considering ever since I started. I mean, when was that? Back in 2007, when I was at Macworld, when they called it Macworld, and Steve Jobs introduced the browser, the phone, and the revolutionary internet device on that stage at Moscone.
Yep.
And you know, and they put the photographers on the side and we were really far back from the stage, and we had our 400s and, you know, big DSLRs and the whole thing. And to see that phone, number one, do what it did, but then also have a camera with it as well, and to see the iterations after that get better and better and better. You know, I think what the phone in your pocket has done is, number one, kind of taking the mystique out of what being a photographer is like, and democratize the process for everyday folks, myself included, that want to take a picture but don't want to have the bulk of a DSLR, a mirrorless camera, a film camera. And with the iterations after that, as the camera's gotten better, with the internet, social media, you can document, you can distribute, and you can communicate with that one little device. Whereas before, you would have to rely on folks like me, folks like us, to publish the content in a very limited form, right? When we were back at the paper, we only had 40, 50 pages,
Right.
for, you know, just a few number of stories. And the only communication that we would have with our readers was emails or letters to the editor. And it was a process. It was days, it was months, it was weeks. And now it's instantaneous. It's seconds. And for all of us to be able to express our point of view and to be able to interact with our audience or whoever gets to see it, right? I'm seeing stuff on my Instagram feed that never thought I'd ever see, but loving it and really enjoying it. You know, and to think that the power of communication and influence and information dissemination is in your pocket. I think that's just been such an amazing thing for the way that we interact and understand and communicate with one another. And I'll tell you, it's only getting better, and the camera is along for that ride. for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's pretty amazing the amount of stuff that we see on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or all those things are only possible because we're carrying these cameras in our pocket. You wouldn't want to roll out your DSR or something like that and then try to get that into a photo sharing app like an Instagram.
Right.
You've shot with some pretty serious cameras. I mean, I know some of your lenses are two, three, $4,000,
Right.
but where do you see the phone camera shining as compared to those, beyond just the being able to shoot something at a moment's notice? And where do you see them falling short? Because I mean, obviously, I mean, my new iPhone 17 Pro, the camera is amazing,
Right.
but I don't think it's as good as that $3,000 lens. I mean, maybe it is.
You know, in some senses it is. In some senses it isn't. The reason why myself as a working professional will opt for, like you said, a $3,000 lens, a $800 lens. Autofocus is faster, right? Glass is
Mm-hmm.
sharper,
Sure.
and when you're serving clients who have an expectation, especially when there's subjects that are moving,
Mm,
people, animals, pets, sports. Um, you want to have those fast motors that can capture the focus a lot quicker. You have a lot more range, right? I'm using a 180 millimeter, 200 to 300 to 400, and then you can get as wide as 1600 or a fisheye
sure.
that's 8 millimeters wide. And the versatility of an interchangeable lens system, you still can't beat it. That said, like we talked about earlier, do I want to be carrying 20 pounds worth of gear on my shoulder?
Right.
When I go to the grocery store,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I'm thinking about a time. I remember I was at Target on the peninsula, and there was a great kind of geometrical uh, scene as I was walking into Target. And it would have been great if I had my medium format, large sensor camera. But all I had was my phone. And back
Yeah.
then I think it was an iPhone X or XR, the 10 or whatever, which I thought was a great setup already.
Absolutely.
And you know what? That's what I had. I understood what the light was doing and things like that. Took a snap of it, was able to get a nice 11 by 14 print out of it.
Hmm.
And so in that situation, if you would have asked me, would I have wanted to have my pro setup? Sure, of course, right? Because you want
Right.
that information, you want that gear. But I would have said, you know what? Probably no. I probably would have just wanted the phone because I was going in to get cleaning supplies and
Yeah.
toilet
Right.
paper and all that stuff and stuff that would be in my hands, and I wouldn't be able to have the full setup. So there are a lot of times, uh, and I'll say, with the exception of work, there are
Right.
a lot of times in my everyday life where I would prefer this little gadget as opposed to the $10,000 setup that I use for work.
Yep.
And so, and the way that they're developing the glass, I mean, they have like mine has what, two lenses, right? This is an iPhone. I think this is an iPhone 13.
Okay.
And so it's several generations old, but it's such an improvement
Yeah.
over the 12, the 11, the 10, the 8,
Uh-huh.
the 9. And I know that the next one that I'm going to get, and I'm due for an upgrade, it's just going to be 10 times better.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I have said for years and years and years that my phone was the best camera I've ever owned, and every year,
absolutely.
every time I upgrade, that is absolutely the case. I mean, this thing can zoom, I mean, digitally 40 times,
Yeah.
and the photo at 40 times is amazing. I took some photos. I took a photo of my dog at 2 times, which is a real zoom at that point,
Yeah.
and it is phenomenal. But,
Phenomenal.
knowing the limits of the phone, I think probably helps people understand how to take better pictures, or at least I have found that. Have you found that in your, talking about phones with people? Because I think that the majority of the kind of people that are, or the majority of people that are listening to this podcast and watching it on YouTube, they are more like me and less like you.
Right. Right. No, I agree with you 100%. There are limitations when you're using such a small sensor. I mean, these sensors are probably the size of your pinky
Yeah.
nail, and because they're so small, because the physical limitations of having to cram it in that small of a space means that you inherently have more depth of field, right? You're not
Mhm.
going to get that separation between foreground and background like you would with a 35 millimeter sensor or even larger medium format sensor. And so you sacrifice that. The smaller sensor is a little bit less sensitive to low light, so you'll get a little bit more degradation in your digital file. Although that is getting better.
I have to tell
Um,
you, the ability for it to understand, like on the iPhone in portrait mode,
right,
it is
right,
pretty phenomenal what you could
yeah,
do, literally point and shoot.
yeah,
And later on, I'm going to ask you about flashes and that kind of stuff. I try to never use my flash
right.
because the low light photography that you could do on this iPhone seems to be, and I know my younger son has a Android device that is just, actually he would say it's better, but it is just as good as doing low light. So
Yeah.
it is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's you're absolutely right with the portrait mode. And, I tell my students, I will give you this information now. Take it with a grain of salt because 12 months from now, it's going to be phenomenally better.
Right.
It's going to change. And, when this whole AI thing, who knows where
Yeah.
they're going to take it. And I'll tell you, I mean, portrait mode, I love portrait mode. My
Yeah.
goodness. What a lifesaver to just be able to blow that background out and
Hmm.
have it in your pocket. It's such a game changer and I love it. I really, really love
Quick
it.
shout out to listeners like you who help make Your Tech Makeover possible. Your support helps keep this podcast going, and I truly appreciate it. Want to contribute? Just click the link in the show notes or visit yourtechmakeover.com. Plus, as a thank you, supporters who give $25 or more will get $25 off a one-time consultation with me to help you simplify your tech. Thanks for being part of the Your Tech Makeover community. Now, back to what we were saying. I want to ask you about composition and some storytelling, but before we go there, one last question on like the basic settings of your phone. So I know that Apple introduced the ability to take high efficiency or HEIF photos as opposed to just your old standard JPEGs that we've been saving JPEGs for 30 years now. What's your feeling on that? Does it really matter for photographers? I mean, I tend to, because I'm old, I tend to go back to the JPEG and leave it at JPEG. But everything I'm reading is like, oh, you should really use the high efficiency settings.
I tell you, for old guys like us who grew up on JPEG, I mean, I still go to JPEG. I still go to the rawest file
Sure.
that I can get, which is I think now you can get a TIFF.
Yeah.
Um, for the simple reason that I like having that information just in case I want to crop it or process it in a certain way. And I remember when HEIC first came out, it wasn't as compatible um, as JPEG was, and so
Yeah.
there was difficulty for uploading files to whatever site that you needed to have some verification for or anything like that. But the fact that it's a smaller file, it's more compatible these days. And I tell there's just some times where I don't need that big of a file. I don't need that much information,
Mhm.
right? If I'm at the library and there's a recipe that I want to record, from a book, I don't need a JPEG. I need that
Sure.
HEIC, and it's been so great to be able to have more space on my phone and not have to worry about, if I take this picture, is it going to clog up a bunch of information on my phone? If I'm feeling artsy fartsy, then I'll go to TIFF, then I'll go to JPEG. But
Right,
to
right,
have
right.
that option of HEIC, oh man, it's been so great, so
So
great
you find yourself switching back and forth between the different types.
for sure.
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the lazy person in me is just like it's JPEG until it's not, and then it's
That's
HEIC until it's not, and then it's
that's
like
right.
because I don't think about that. I mean, I think most people don't think about it. It's like I'm gonna set it. It's going to most likely be whatever is standard because now, I mean, I know with the new phones, the HEIC is the standard.
Right.
Um, and that's fine unless, like you said, you're sharing it or you're trying to upload something to a website. It just makes it a little more difficult.
And for what we're doing with the way that we use photography these days, you don't need that big of a file.
Right.
HEIC is more than enough to, text you an image of a birthday party that I attended, or some sort of whatever that I want to share on social media. So
Right, you don't need to be sharing a raw file on Instagram, to your 7-inch phone. It's just not gonna
That's
do you
right.
any good.
That's right.
So as far as taking pictures, what are some simple tricks that people can use that will instantly make their, photography better on their phone? And what kind of common mistakes do you usually see when people are doing those photos? 'Cause I know I know what a good photo looks like, but
Mm.
I don't know that I really know logically why a good photo looks good.
Yeah, and this goes along with what we were talking about with the smaller sensors and depth of field, is that whatever your subject is in front of really impacts the how good your photo turns out.
Okay.
If I'm making
So
a portrait
background
of
is important.
background is absolutely huge. If I'm making a portrait of you and I stand you up uh, in front of a light pole,
Mhm.
right, and there's a big pole coming out of your head, it could be the greatest photo of you, but you got a pole coming out of the back of your head, right? Or if I'm shooting into the sun,
Right.
and I'm shooting at the wrong angle, there's just going to be a big lens flare that isn't flattering to the final image. And so, as much as the subject is important, what you put it in front of makes or breaks the visual impact of your message and the aesthetics of the photo. So that's the one thing that I really want to impart that I impart to my students, is that be conscious of what's behind your subject, because your subject can be really great, and because you're taking a photo of that object or place or thing, you really want to immortalize it by having a clean background, which portrait mode helps, right, because it'll blur it out.
Right.
But you really want to be conscious of what's behind your subject.
And that's super important. I mean, like we don't always have if we're out shooting a soccer game of our kids or we're at a dinner, we don't always have total control over that background. But
Right.
even moving a foot to your left or a foot to your right might get you that kind of background that is better than not. I mean, I know a lot of the photos that you've taken for news or in sports, you are stuck with the background that it is because you can't change that perspective. But I
Yeah.
think that with us, shooting just snapping photos, you do have a little bit of control. Now, you probably aren't going to go to somebody's house and tell them to take the pictures off the wall because they're distracting, but you could also, move people around a little bit, especially
Absolutely.
stationary photos. What about and I remember us talking about this at the paper long time ago, the me and my prop photo. So I'm winning an award, and I want a picture of me with my certificate. How would you tell people, or what would you suggest to people to make those kind of photos better?
If you're having an object that you want to have in the photo, a lot of people will naturally bring it down to their waist level. And so
Mm,
you have a gap between the chin and the top of the plaque or the award or the statue that they're holding. And so that negative space really kind of takes away from um, the viewer's gaze, and it splits it between that shiny object, which is down lower in the photo, and then the face of the person, which you actually want to see. So I think if you bring the top of that plaque or object or award right around middle of chest, so that their hands aren't straight and
Mm.
their elbows are kind of a little flared to the side. That makes a little bit more of an impactful photo. And then also turning their shoulders at an angle so that you're not straight on to the camera, where this plane of my face and the front of my body is parallel to the plane of the
Mm.
field of the camera. So
Okay.
just by turning at 35, 45 degrees, you create a little bit of a visual kind of dissonance that introduces the third, I guess in mathematical terms, of the third axis, and gives you just a hair bit of dimension, whether you're photographing one person or two people at an angle, or a group where you turn the folks on the left to one angle and you turn the folks to the right at another angle, so you kind of converge in the
Okay.
middle, so you have a little bit more depth in that image there.
Oh, and it's a little more interesting than just this line of people or me holding, whatever it might be that I'm holding up.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
So you have these groups of people, and I know that lighting. We've talked a little bit about lighting, and
Yeah.
sometimes you can control the lighting, sometimes you can't control the lighting. What's your best advice for indoor lights, outdoor lights, especially during the holidays? I mean, I know that in my household, we have the Christmas tree. It might have white lights, it might have colored lights, it probably will have white lights. So you have this weird light source, and you have the normal light source in the room, and maybe you have some backlighting because you have a window behind you or a window
Right.
behind the person that's taking the picture. So how do you handle those kind of tricky situations like that?
Yeah, I mean, and tricky is certainly the right term to use for that, because you have different color temperatures, different sizes of lights. I think for me, if I was to walk into a room, I would gravitate towards the largest source of light, meaning relative to my subject.
Okay.
So if I'm looking at a family party, which we had a lot when I was a kid, for Christmas, I would kind of plant myself close to the Christmas tree,
Okay.
because you have a lot of smaller lights, but then when they're all stuck together, they create a large light source. And so when you have
Sure.
a large light source like that, like a large lamp with a lampshade on top of it, or even better yet, a window, if you're
Mhm.
celebrating during the daytime, any large light source will cast a soft light on any subject that's smaller than it. A human head, food, things like that. And so anytime we're photographing our loved ones, any sort of soft light that we can get, um, is our ideal kind of source of light. No overhead can lights, no, bare light bulbs, not even flash or flashlights from the phone. Um, the larger you can make that source of light emanating from in a certain direction, um, and having it come from an angle, either left or right, your photography improves that much more.
Okay.
And so,
So either behind the photographer or left or right of the photographer, so that the light's coming at an angle to the subjects. Um, what about the flash? I mean, I said earlier that I hardly ever use the flash.
yeah,
I feel like it washes out more than not. Not to mention you have to wait for it to actually flash, and inevitably you end up missing that moment.
right.
So when would be a good time to use a flash? And what, not that you'd want to set up lights around your holiday tables, but could you add some extra lights in the room so that you do take better pictures? Or if you're taking portrait type pictures, what are some tricks that you've used? What are some different devices that you've used in order to make that lighting kind of better?
I tell you, the table lamp is a great light source. It's small, it's portable. You can use a lampshade. Um, if you can grab one and pull the lampshade off and put it next to a large neutral colored wall, so that the light bounces off the wall and gives you that softer light.
So
But I'll tell you,
don't put the light in between you and the subject to light the subject up, but let it bounce off of another item so that you can then get that reflective light, if you will.
correct. Yeah, correct. I'll tell, but in a pinch, everyone has a phone,
Mhm.
and most of these phones these days have flashlights on them.
Oh,
And so if you gather up enough people, let's say if you're photographing, the Thanksgiving turkey, um, you want to have that large light source. Grab 4 or 5 of, your uncles and your aunts and your cousins and your nieces and nephews and have them turn on the flashlight, hold them all next to each other and at an angle for that turkey. Um, and it creates a kind of a softer light that can serve you in a pinch. But
it
that
also
said,
gets other people involved, right? I mean, so you're
it
not
does.
just there doing it. It becomes a group activity
That's right.
to take that photo.
That's right. And I'll tell you, the young folks these days, they love photography.
Mm,
And they eat up any sort of technique or tips or tricks that you can use, and so they are more than willing participants to help out. And yeah, it becomes one of those things where everybody gets involved, and it ends up being a good time for everybody because everybody wants to see what you shot and how
right.
good it looks. And so that's been fun. I know with my niece and my nephew, that's always been a kind of a fun thing to do. But that said, on the flip side too, if you look at any food magazine lately, hard flash is a thing.
So
And
explain hard flash.
so hard flash is the type of light that comes from a smaller light source
Okay.
relative to your subject. So if I was to photograph you using my phone and just the flash, because this flash is this small, and your average normal size head is way bigger than this output. When it hits your subject, you're going to get some harsh shadows.
Okay.
And for people, not so great. But if you're photographing, a specialty cocktail that, your cousin made for the holidays, that's kind of a trend these days where you get a lot of that contrast. And when that hard light hits the colors of the glass, maybe it's like a red or a green or whatever the fluid may be or the drink may be, um, it adds a little bit of a kind of an edginess,
Hmm.
a contemporary kind of look to those images that you find a lot lately in things like Food and Wine and all those sort of magazines that are on the cutting edge of food photography. So you can get away with hard flash if you're looking for that look. But if it's your grandma's 100-year-old turkey recipe, you probably don't want hard flash for that. Soft light would be probably more
Be
appropriate
much
for.
better. And that's
Yeah,
where you could use your cameras, your other phone lights that are around and kind of give
absolutely
that shine. And that then makes a bigger light source than
correct.
just an individual light. Because I mean, I know that I've seen you in professional shoots that you have, stand lights and these large lights
Right,
that throw lots of light, but they are very diffused.
right,
Whereas if you take just a little flashlight, you're not going to get that.
right.
Um, what about the ones that are running around, the kids, the pets, people that never sit still
Yeah,
or, so the dog is in my life right now, the thing that I
yeah,
take pictures of that more
yeah,
than anything because she's around all the time. But,
yeah.
um, kids, they're always running around. And how do you get good pictures from them, and kind of a candid shot type, solution?
Yeah. It goes back to the beginnings of manual photography where there was no autofocus and things like that.
Mm,
So the thing that I learned uh when I was shooting sports, especially with soccer, is instead of trying to follow them around and knowing that the autofocus isn't going to keep up with them, if you're sitting on the couch or you're sitting at the table and you see the kids running around, eventually they're going to come towards you.
hmm,
And with the autofocus lock feature, you can compose that frame, lock it on, they have the grid on there, lock it on one of the thirds where the two lines intersect, and just wait until the kids come into that plane of focus. And the only thing you're doing at that point is hitting the shutter button. So if you take away the idea of having to follow them, having to try to focus on them, having to do all these in composition, all that stuff, having all those things preset where all you're thinking about is them coming into that plane and hitting that shutter button, it takes away a lot of the stress about getting sharp photos and making sure you got the right moment, all that stuff. And then also keeps you engaged in being able to enjoy that actual holiday as opposed to being a photographer on assignment.
You're right.
You know what I mean?
But
And
talk a
so,
little bit about that autofocus, because I know that I have struggled a little bit with that, where I think something's in focus and then I take a picture of it and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that wrong thing is in focus. So, what tricks can you provide that will allow you to lock that autofocus in place?
yeah. So, I mean, if I'm thinking about a time where we were at holiday, I think I was back home overseas, and we had the adults at the table and the kids running around. And I was trying to talk to my aunts, my uncles, and my grandma and my grandpa and the whole thing, but also knowing that, this is a moment where you're not going to get again because the kids are going to grow up and all that stuff.
Sure.
And so I was pivoting back and forth. And I remember seeing them and, knowing the kids and this is a thing when, when you're with your family, is that your family's tendencies,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You know where the kids are going to run around, what they like doing. And so having that information and using that to your advantage, knowing that, okay, they're running around in circles right now. So at a certain point, they're going to be about 5 feet away and it's going to fill up my frame. It's going to be prominent in the picture. It's going to make a great picture. And so what I'm going to do is I'll take my phone, I'll tap and hold until the little box lights up. And this is for iPhone, but I'm sure it works for Android too.
Right.
It'll give you that confirmation that you're locked on that one thing. And for me, it was this, my grandma's house had like a little sunken courtyard in the middle of it. And she had this plant at the corner of the door. So I pre-focused on that plant, and then knowing that the camera sensor is so small that you have an inherent deep depth of field,
Sure.
that anything between me and the plant will be sharp or relatively sharp. And I would just sit there. You would listen to the kids as they were screaming and laughing and yelling. And as the sound got closer, I would turn, my attention and just kind of frame up and wait for them to move. And, I mean, let's face it, I didn't get into the first shot, I didn't get into the second
Sure.
shot. But by the 5th time, the 6th time, before they were pooped out and, sprawled out on the floor.
Then they became a
done
lot
their
easier
nap.
to take pictures of because they weren't running around, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But not nearly as fun.
Right. But you still get the same sort of emotion as they're starting to tail down a little bit. So you get that. And then as fatigues, sets in and they start slowing down, that's when you can get up and photograph the aftermath.
Sure.
So you have the action, you have the reaction, and then you have the moment where things kind of settle down. So you have yourself a little mini story that you can build in the larger story of telling the narrative of Thanksgiving 2025, Christmas 2025 kind of thing.
Right. And that's the thing, that people are going to take those photos and put 3 or 4 of them together and put
Right.
them out on Instagram.
Right.
What about burst mode? I mean, I think all the camera apps have some sort of burst mode. I mean, I know your professional cameras, absolutely, you could take hundreds of photos a minute with.
Yeah.
How would using something like that? I mean, obviously, then it gives you an editing process because now you're looking at a million different photos instead of just one.
Yeah.
What tips can you give to our listeners and watchers that are around the burst mode, or do you even bother with it because you're just like, I want to capture this one instance?
Yeah, no, it's burst mode is a tool. And burst mode, I really like it just because it gives you, again, I tell my students, the more that you can press that button, the closer you are to getting the shot that you want to get.
Hmm.
And, kind of take that with a grain of salt when it comes to burst mode. However, when you can photograph a moving object as it's going through the frame of your camera, as opposed to relying on that one single shot and having the perfect timing. Um, that strength in numbers, those odds, when you talk about, multiple images, will get you a little bit closer to the image that you want to get. The caveat to that is that if your timing's off,
Mhm.
then you're not going to get the image that you want, right? If the
Right.
kids zoom past you already and then you hit the shutter, you're not going to get it. But that said, if you work on your timing and you, what we call, mash that shutter, you'll get a nice little sequence of one of the youngins running around. And from that 10, that 15, you can pick that right moment. And with that practice, your timing will get better and better and better, so that you have to rely on burst mode less. But burst mode, I tell you, it's a great insurance policy
Mm.
for times like that, where you're getting together with your family, once a year on a special occasion like that, in that circumstance.
What about live photos? I mean, I know that like on an iPhone, again, we're talking iPhone here because you and I are both Mac people or Apple people.
Yeah.
What about the live photos? They drive me crazy when people send them to me, but I know that you can adjust the keyframe, the frame that you actually see.
Yeah.
And kind of the next step of that, what about taking video and extracting stills from those videos?
Both of those things are such a wonderful creative avenue to explore. Um, Not something that I would inherently turn to from the get go, because I'm a
Mm,
stills guy.
sure.
Uh, but that said, like you said, when you can move that keyframe around and take several live photos, stack them together, and create like a little animation, which
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people who are a lot more creative than me do that really, really well. I mean, it's a whole different way of communicating and storytelling and presenting a narrative that is fun, uh, you know, engages your audience in a different way. And then there's times where the video part of it uh, really makes more impact and has a better
Mm,
makes better sense
sure.
than just a stills guy, which kind of pains me as a stills guy, right? Right. But when you're singing happy birthday and you want to
Right.
see the range of emotion of the birthday celebrant as they're going through that whole process of being sung to and being honored and things like that. Video, there's something that video does that really immortalizes the moment and the time that you are together.
And there are tools that will allow you to take those frames out of those videos
Absolutely.
so that you
Yeah.
get the picture of, your uncle blowing out the candles at
Yeah.
that exact moment, and you don't have to wait, okay, well, is he taking a breath or what? How is
Yeah.
he kind of getting ready to blow out the candles? Where you
Yeah.
have the video, you can then say, okay, well, this is the frame
Yeah.
where the candles are at an angle, and there's tools that allow you to do that built in natively to
Yeah.
our studios in our pocket.
I'll tell you, I've seen people shoot a video and, again, talking iPhone, shoot a video, go into the iMovie app, scroll through the timeline, and take a screenshot of the
Mm,
moment that they wanted to capture and texted it to everybody. And that was more than enough for what people wanted to have.
That's a great tip. I mean, yeah, you have the photos, but you also have the ability to take photos of those photos by doing the
Right.
screen shots of the devices and able to capture it in that paused moment where you don't have to know how to edit that video out. You don't ever edit that image out of the video. Just
Yeah,
take a screenshot, send that along. Again, we're not printing billboards with these images. We're sharing
absolutely.
them with our friends, we're sharing them with our family, we're posting them online
Yeah,
with relatively low resolutions.
yeah,
So we've taken all these photos now. We have them all saved in on our phone, I presume. Maybe if you are using iCloud or Google Photos, they're in your Google Photos. What's one simple edit that you recommend everybody do to a photo if you want to make it just a little bit better?
contrast helps a lot,
Hmm.
and without doing the fancy presets or filters or anything like that, inherently digital cameras will give you a flat file, because it opens up the possibility to post process it the way that your aesthetic allows, and just 2 points, 3 points, 5 points of contrast in the native phone app really kind of brings that image to life. It'll separate your highlights and your shadows just enough to kind of give you just a little bit of pop, and then from there you can tone the color temperature, throw a filter on if you want, but just outside, just a little bit of contrast is, and especially the way that these cameras render these days, sometimes all you need in the correct lighting situation is just 3 points of contrast,
Hmm.
and you're off to the races, and it's great.
How much is too much? I mean, obviously, in journalism, we wouldn't go edit out a garbage can that happens to be sitting there
Right.
next to a photo of a event.
Yeah.
But in normal everyday life, how much editing is too much editing?
I think when your highlights get blown out, especially with skin tone, and you'll see that moment when it starts to break up. You can kind of go too far on that, and then by the same token, too, the more HDR that you go,
Hmm.
take this with a grain of salt, because I like using the shadows and highlight slider to give me a little bit more detail. But when you have too much detail in your highlights and your shadows, you don't get that aesthetic visual dissonance in post processing, um, where everything is too perfect, right? You want to give your viewer a little bit of a challenge when they're viewing your image, to have them dive in a little bit deeper and use their own imagination to bring back some of the shadows, to bring
Hmm.
back some of those highlights, to have it relate to them as you're looking at images, as they're looking at your images, so that you're not presenting a dish that's too pretty to eat, as they
Oh,
say. You
yeah.
know,
Okay.
you want them to be able to dive into your picture and really look at the nuances the little Easter eggs that you plant in your images, whether that's through contrast or color temperature, the way you crop things. Um, because we'll all have our different interpretations of stuff, and
Sure.
if you're starting to strive to get that perfect image, the more and more you stray away from it being the right image, because the way that you look at images are just different from the way that I do. This is different
Sure.
from the way that my sister does, and so on and so forth. So you want to have um, a little bit of that dissonance in terms of the artistic sense, where you let your viewer do some of the work for themselves.
Cool. Yeah, that makes total sense. So we now have, a million photos in our pocket. I mean, I know that my
Right.
library is with me as I go, and organization is a huge thing because to try to find something, unless you know the day it is, and we've talked a little bit about AI and how that's making life a little bit easier because I know I can go to my photo library and say, show me a picture of a dog, and it'll show me all the pictures of the dog.
Right.
But what organizational tips do you have kind of on a high level? And I'd love to have you back again in the future to talk about organizing in particular, because you and we've talked a lot about organizing our photos. I think you obviously have way more than I do, but when I was at the paper, we were dealing with hundreds of photos a day coming in,
Yeah.
and trying to keep that organized is kind of a nightmare. But as a personal photographer, I know that I have hundreds of photos that are just in my library by date. So what tips can you give kind of on a high level that will help people get organized?
This Frank, this topic goes to, I'm just gonna I'm gonna echo a lot of the things that you have told me over the years, and my workflow in terms of storage and digital organization. For everybody listening here, the only reason why I have a digital workflow and digital organization file is because of Frank Bravo. So
That's very nice. I think you probably would have gotten there eventually, but I know that, and the only reason that I've developed one is, like I was saying, at the paper, we went from shooting live photos on paper. I remember years in the dark room
yeah,
doing halftones for the paper, and then
yeah,
it was like, oh, we could take those halftones and we can scan them. Oh, great. Now we have all these physical photos, but we also have all these digital photos. And what do you do with them? Because you don't want to lose them. And now I am super paranoid about my digital photos, because it is likely the only copy of that image that is anywhere is locked in my photo library.
for sure. No, for sure. And I think the one thing that we did that you set up at the paper was having that um, library of that hierarchy of when you would shoot images.
Mm,
And it's not a thing for I wouldn't suggest to the casual photo enthusiast, or even kind of the semi-serious photo enthusiast, to um, be constantly thinking about offloading your images from your phone, because that gets kind of tedious.
sure.
But being conscious of a monthly photo dump where you pull those images or make copies of those images that are on your phone and you put them on a hard drive, um, and being diligent about dating, putting those images in a folder that has the date and a short description of whatever it was, that party, that location, those recipes, like we were talking about earlier, whatever, so that you can remember that, okay, that picture that I remember was Thanksgiving, whatever year it was. So you can go back into your archives and say, okay, let me do a keyword search for Thanksgiving, so
Mm-hmm.
that you're not scrolling through 100 pictures of 2025, and trying to look from January all the way through December. And
Sure.
so the folder system for me, when like you said, when I eventually figured it out, taking the influence of what you guys set up, what you and your staff set up at the Palo Alto Weekly, made it so much easier for me to pull images that I either needed for licensing
Mm,
sake, or
mm-hmm.
when my mom said, "Hey, when we were at your sister's house celebrating, um, your brother-in-law's birthday, you have that one picture," and I could say it's there somewhere, but I know exactly where it is, and it took me minutes as opposed to hours or days to
Sure.
sift through those images. And so I think having an organizational system where sometimes your folders will only have 2 or 3 or 4 photos, and depending on the event, some folders will have 100 photos. But to be able to break them up into smaller subsets where you're not going through a bunch of stuff, and then backing them up on a second drive, um, and even in the cloud. I know
Right.
you've turned me on to a bunch of great cloud systems too, which are off-site, and God forbid something happens uh, to your drives at home or in the office, you have something off-site that is constantly getting backed up and rated and all that stuff. So there's that redundancy there, and what do you need? Like a 5 terabyte drive for the most of
If
us, that'll
even,
be plenty
yeah,
of storage, right? So,
yeah. And
just to
drives have
have that.
gotten so cheap now too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. It's been
yeah.
incredible. It's been great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll talk more about storage and organization because I'd love to have you back to talk about that. So, just kind of wrapping up here, you know, I want to talk about your personal use of your phone and how you take
Mhm.
pictures with your phone. Both as a professional, like you talked about. This looks cool. I want to take a picture, or I'm out somewhere and I see an event. I need to snap something. What feature or mode do you find most useful when you go to use your phone?
For certain subjects, I have really enjoyed um, the portrait mode.
Mm,
We talked
okay.
about that. We talked about that earlier. Just when there's things where you want to separate the background just a little bit more, um, but then also, the wide, like for my two lens phone, I have a 1x and then a 0.5x. So you have a wide and a standard. And sometimes if I forget to put it on the wide, but when I do, it opens up a whole different avenue for me to tell the story of, whether it's a family party or whether it's just me on my daily walk through the neighborhood, and it gives me a different perspective um, from what I'm just seeing with my two eyes, right?
Sure.
Which technically through your eyes is about a 50 millimeter, 42, 50 millimeter. Um, but just having that versatility, and at some point I'll upgrade to the pro, right? And have the close up function and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And just to be able to see those three different points of view, a wide, a normal, and a close up, uh, number one has allowed me to kind of see the world from a non-professional point of view, see it a lot differently. Kind of see the big picture, and then kind of being able to narrow down into the little details. And then from the professional side of things, as a work practice, it's helped me expand the way that I tell the story of
Mm,
a daily walk or
sure.
time with my niece and nephews, or um, something as mundane as, oh, you know what? Let me take a picture of that because the light's nice.
Because it looks cool.
Um,
Yeah.
because it looks cool. Yeah, and not knowing what I'm gonna do with it later, it might just, like, live on my phone, which is 90% of those images, right?
Yeah.
But also knowing that, okay, if there's a lot of contrast in that scene, that phone isn't gonna that processor isn't gonna treat it the way that my eye will see it.
Sure.
And so knowing that, okay, I probably want something with a little bit of a flatter contrast so that I can get the artsy kind of look and have all the detail that I want. Or knowing that, okay, that's a contrasty scene, and I know that the phone is going to render it this way, and I'm going to react to that. Um, but it's given me those reps that I wouldn't otherwise get because I'm not taking my one camera and one DSLR lens with me
Right.
all the time.
Right. Cool. So, finally, we've talked about a lot of different things that people can do, normal people like me who aren't a photographer. What are the three takeaways that you would say that somebody could use starting today that would
Mhm.
immediately improve the kind of photos that they take? I mean, especially, as we go into the holiday season here, we're all, like I said at the top, we're all going to be taking photos and we have this studio in our pocket. What are three
Yeah.
things that people could go try now so that you're not doing it for the first time when you're taking the picture of the turkey or of the kids running around, that will immediately improve the kind of photos that they are taking?
I think, for folks, if I were to tell folks that after this podcast is finished, in the next minute, go towards a window and take a picture of half of the window and then half of the wall,
Hmm,
and see
okay.
how your camera reacts to shadow and light as they interact with one another. Because that's one of the things
Interesting.
where in in our holiday parties, like we talked about, right? You're gonna have the dining room is going to be lit really well. But then you go to the living room right next door and you're going to have a floor lamp. You're going to have some overhead lights with a lot of different contrast. And so you don't want to be fumbling with how your camera is going to react in that actual moment. So to do a little exercise where you have a inherently contrasty scene with that window and the wall, you'll see which, your iPhone 13 or your 17 or your Google Pixel, which it'll favor a little bit more. Will it give you more detail in the shadows? Will it give you more detail in the highlights? So that you're armed with that process. And then when you go out on your everyday, dealings with life and errands and all things like that, and you photograph something just because it's cool. Again, backgrounds. I can't stress that. Can't stress that enough, right? So that's the second thing. Third thing is when you're at that holiday party, with the office or all the different celebrations that you're going to have, where you're going to be at an event and you're going to want to document those things. Have a plan. A lot of people will go into those celebrations or those events not having an idea of, okay, these are the type of photos I want to take. These are the type of images that I want to walk away with. And knowing that, you're dealing with people that you work with, that you're familiar with, that the quirks and the nuances of what they do and how they do it. Know that you want to capture Uncle Joe's, crazy dancing after he's full of tryptophan and a couple drinks, right? So you're going to get that picture. You're going to get the kids running around. And so almost have a mental shot list of the images that you want to get, so that you're not just going in cold turkey, no pun intended, into that space where you're just kind of snapping around at things and reacting to things, but instead being more proactive because you have that familiarity of the situation and the scenarios that you're going to be stepping into.
That's a great tip. I mean, I know that professionally, when you go out to shoot something, you have already in mind, these are the shots that I think I'm going to need because, the reporter has said this or the editor has said this. But I don't think that a home photographer thinks about that. I think it's like reactive more than planning those things out. So that's an amazing tip. So Don, I really appreciate you having for taking the time to be here to talk with us about photography and such today. If people want to find you, where would they go find you online?
So I am online. My website is donferia.com. And my biggest presence on social media is Instagram, which is kind of a mess right now. I got to curate it a little bit better, but I am at Don Feria. Super original handle there.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it makes it easy to find you, and your photos. I mean, that's where I see most of your work these days is on Instagram, and I really enjoy the random stuff you're taking picture of, the light outside a Target, the tennis balls on the tennis court, the rain reflecting off the window. I think you had something at SFO recently that you took a picture of. I mean, it's those kind of photos that I'm like, man, I know he's just taking them with his phone camera and just point and shoot, and they are a million times better than I could do. So that's the real reason I wanted to have you here. It's 100% selfish so that I can take better photos, and hopefully the people listening will learn, and you as viewers and listeners will be able to take better photos as well.
Well, Franks, this has been so much fun, and I'll tell you, the joy of photography has been a thing that been such an honor to be able to share with everybody, and to be able to collaborate with you during the time that we were at the paper together, and then also to be guided with you afterwards. With all the digital conundrums and quandaries that I've had as a freelancer, to be under your guidance has been absolutely key to sustaining a career that I've had. So I would like to take this time to publicly thank you for everything you've done for me in my career. So I appreciate that. Can't emphasize that enough, Frank. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Well, and I never get tired of hearing that. So I do appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right.
Thanks,
Well,
Frank.
Don, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely.
So, what are your takeaways to help you make your photography better? Let me know. And as always, if you have ideas for topics you'd like me to cover, please feel free to email me at frank@yourtechmakeover.com. That's it for now. Thanks for listening to Your Tech Makeover. If you haven't already, make sure you don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, like this episode and follow the episodes on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. You can also check out yourtechmakeover.com, where you can see more information about each episode. And if you want to find out more about me, you can visit bravoitc.com. Until next time, I'm Frank Bravo, and this has been Your Tech Makeover.